All right, hello and welcome. I'm Martha Kordiak-Mert from Saving for College. We're excited to present this webinar today on how to reduce future tuition costs, and so glad that you all could join us. Our webinar is being presented by Joanne Dashiell and Jonathan Sparling from the Private College 529. They'll be describing their 529 plan and the very unique benefits it offers. Before they get started, just a few quick admin notes for everyone. The webinar is being recorded and we will be sending out a link to the recording after the webinar, so keep an eye out for that. In that same email, we will include a brief survey. So please let us know what you thought. Your feedback is very important. And finally, Joanne and Jonathan will do their best to answer your questions. So please add them into the Q&A box throughout the webinar so that they can see them and respond to them as they have time. And with that said, I will turn it over to Joanne to get us started.
Thank you so much, Martha. We are so happy to be here with you today, and thanks so much for joining us to learn more about Private College 529 Plan. We've worked with Saving for College now for a couple of years, and we are so excited to partner with them for this webinar today. So thank you again for joining us and for learning how Private College 529 Plan could fit into your college savings strategy. So I am going to begin with how Private College 529 plan got started over 20 years ago. Then we're going to jump into how the plan works, and Jonathan's going to provide some savings scenarios for you, show you some savings examples, and then also give you a little bit of a behind the scene looks at the account owner experience. So our account owner portal, once you prepay tuition, what does that look like in your account, and how can you monitor how much tuition you've prepaid at any of our member institutions over the year. So we'll show you that, and then we'll jump right back into plan benefits and frequently asked questions that we know will likely pop up during the conversation here today. But as Martha also said, we'll be paying close attention to that Q&A feature that you have there through Zoom. So please do not hesitate to send questions out as I'm speaking. Jonathan will respond to questions that come in, and I'll do the same when he's speaking. And if we have time at the end, we'll address any unanswered questions that we weren't able to get to. So feel free to throw those questions out there throughout the session today. So to get started, in 1998, a group of private colleges got together and formed Tuition Plan Consortium as a way to address college affordability. And they set out with three main guiding principles. First, they wanted to help families save, so set aside resources for future college expenses. Second, they wanted to help reduce the expenses for families, so help making costs and college expenses more manageable, making it more affordable for families. And then third, in developing a college savings program, it was important for them to create a system or create a program that was going to be able to be used at a wide range of institutions across the country. Now, 5 short years later, Private College 529 plan was introduced, so introduced in 2003, and it was initially introduced under the name of Independent 529 plan, in case that rings a bell to anybody. But in our over 20 year, not 200, over 20 year history, families, we're very proud to say that families have redeemed over $200 million in prepaid tuition at our member institutions. And so certainly finding value in locking in tuition at today's prices to use in the future. So just a brief overview of how this plan works compared to some other 529 plans that you might be familiar with. And then I'll send it over to Jonathan, who's going to jump into those savings scenarios and talk to you about what it looks like as an account owner. But I think most families are familiar with 529 savings plans or savings or investment plans. Each state owns, and the majority of states own their own 529 savings plan where contributions are invested in the market. And that, of course, comes with potentially market volatility and some market exposure. And then there are also 529 prepaid plans, of which Private College 529 is a prepaid plan. And those, instead of your contributions being invested in the market, you are essentially prepaying tuition to use in the future. And so those are traditionally do not come with any sort of market exposure or market risk. Now, there are a handful of states in the country that offer prepaid plans now, and those are traditionally geared toward in-state families to use at in-state public colleges and universities. And Private College 529 plan is the only nationwide prepaid plan that was created for private colleges and universities. And today we have close to 300 private colleges and universities that participate. And the way this works is that your contributions are actually locking in a percentage of today's tuition. So the actual published tuition rates that colleges are charging families today, your contributions are locking in today's tuition rates at a different percentage at each institution that participates in the plan. And you would still own that same percentage of tuition years down the road as tuition increase. And that's where you find value and growth within your private college 529 account. Now, because you're prepaying tuition, there is no market risk. The value of your prepaid tuition increases as tuition increases. And the good thing with private college 529 is that there are no fees. So every dollar that you're contributing to your account is locking in tuition at today's rates. Because we're a nationwide plan, there are no state residency requirements. So you can live anywhere in the country and participate in the plan and lock in tuition. And you don't need to know where your child is going to go to college. You're locking in tuition at each college and university that participates at the same time when you're contributing to your account. I'll turn it over to Jonathan in just a minute, but before I do that, I just want to mention that Private College 529 plan isn't the only service that we offer. Our parent brand is College Well, and our mission is to help families just provide a clear path and expert guidance to help families plan and save for college. And we do that by bringing in experts like financial advisors, experts who work in admissions and financial aid at our member colleges and universities to give you the real scoop on what's going on right now in financial aid and in admissions and in college enrollment. So I would encourage you to visit collegewell.com to take advantage of all those free resources and also, to take another look at PC 529 when you're on there as well. So having said that, I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan now, and let's dive into how the plan works with some saving scenarios.
Great. Well, thank you, Joanne. And let me add my welcome to everyone and appreciate you taking some time to learn more about Private College 529 plan and keep those questions coming in the Q&A. I was able to address a few of them. And like Joanne said, we will certainly get to those throughout the presentation. So the primary value of the plan, all prepaid plans, is the ability to save now, protect against tuition inflation moving forward, and really that guarantee, right? Not having to worry about market exposure. And so, in terms of kind of opening the account, really straightforward. This can be done online, takes about 10 to 15 minutes to do so. You, as the account owner or grandparent or an aunt and uncle, whoever wants to open a 529 plan for the beneficiary, you would start that account, identify yourself as the account owner, assign that beneficiary, and then begin making initial deposits or contributions to your account. Now, you can make a one-time contribution, you can do yearly, quarterly, monthly, however you want to make contributions. And so that is your prerogative, and that's something that can change on an ongoing basis. And then essentially how the locking in is working that Joanne described is that all your contributions for the entire plan year, and our plan year runs July 1st to June 30th, all contributions are locking in a percentage of tuition and mandatory fees at each individual college. And so it doesn't really matter when you make the contribution or how much you make in contributions. All of those contributions in totality over the plan year are aggregated into a single, what we call tuition certificate, for each college at the end of the year. And so the certificate, it's not an actual certificate, but just think of that as the actual vehicle or instrument. So let's say you open an account on July 2nd when you make a $1,000 contribution. If you make four subsequent $1,000 contributions before June 30th, then $5,000 is going to be what your total contribution is over the plan year. And that's essentially what's going to be counted towards, or the portion that's going to lock in tuition and fees at each school in the plan. Now, Joanne mentioned you're saving at the actual tuition and fee rates at every school, and that's important. And one of the things that we do publish, or we have, is called our pricing guide. So the pricing guide on our website shows the actual tuition and fees that you'd be saving at this year. So you don't have to worry about searching those out on your own. And then those tuition and fee rates reset on July 1st. So here we are in mid-April. As you can imagine, pretty busy time at our plan. April, May, and June, folks are getting in contributions before those rates reset on July 1st and conceivably are going up because now instead of locking in at the current 2025, 2026 rates, after July 1st, you're locking in at the 2026, 2027 published rates. Um, so you can go to the next slide, Joanne. So that's how the locking in works. And really just to kind of drive this point home, and again, a primary value of the plan is that you're not tracking an index. You're not locking in at an index or an average. It's the actual tuition and fees at each school in the plan. And because they all cost different, then obviously you're going to lock in a difference. So in this example here, let's say you made a $30,000 contribution. I know that's a significant contribution, but you can add in any dollar amount you want here. If college X costs $30,000 in annual tuition and fees, then that 30,000 would have locked you in at 100% or one full year of tuition and fees. Now that's at college X. College Y, where the cost is 40,000, you've locked in 75%. College Z, where the cost is 60,000, well, your 30,000 is buying you 50%. And this same calculation or value assessment is being applied to every college in the plan. Now, from a tracking standpoint, we do allow you to track up to 10 sample institutions that you can change out at any time. We'll show you what that looks like in a little bit. And so you can head to the next slide, Joanne. And so that's really how the locking in works. And then over time, that is obviously going to grow. And that's going to grow at you're guaranteed to own the same percentage of tuition fees, regardless of how much costs go up. So when it times to come to redeem your tuition certificate, you will do that when your child enrolls at a member college. Again, you're not choosing the member college when you open the plan. Nobody really knows where their kid's going to go. But you redeem, you make that choice once your child chooses the member college. And again, the redeemable value of your prepaid tuition is going to depend on how long you've held your tuition certificates for and the annual increase in tuition mandatory fees. So simply stated, if tuition increased 4% per year, the value of your certificate goes up 4% per year. And of course, it's tax-free. So let's bring that example back here and just to kind of show you what that looks like. Let's pretend that your child ended up going to college Y, if you recall in that first slide there, where you locked in 75% of 1 year with your $30,000 deposit when it costs 40,000. If college Y continues to go up 4% a year, after 10 years, the future cost of 1 year is now 59,210. But you own 75% or you've locked in 75% of that tuition in the future. And so your actual value is going to be 44,407, which means just over 14,400 on savings of tuition tax free. So pretty good value. And again, it's tracking that tuition inflation. So we're using 4% example. If it's 6% a year, year over year, that's what the real value is. If it's 2% 1 year, 5%, it's going to vary, so on and so forth. I will mention here that our plan is really intended for undergraduate tuition and mandatory fees. You can certainly use for non-tuition related expenses as well as graduate expenses, but that's going to be a slightly different calculation in terms of the value, and we'll talk about what that means in a little bit. All right, so that's an example of saving in 1 year, kind of a one and done. But that's not how most of our account owners and certainly most of you are saving. So let's look at an example of saving over multiple years. And this, I think, is the behavior and typically how more people are saving. So let's go back to plan year one. In this year, you're now, instead of making a $30,000 contribution, you're opening an account making a $10,000 contribution. Current tuition and mandatory fees the same at college X, Y, and Z as they were in the first example. But now your 10,000 is obviously locking you in a slightly less percentage at each school, 33, 25, and 17%. So that's your total contributions in plan year one. We now move to plan year two. You're going to make another $10,000 contribution. That could be one lump sum or it could be over the entire plan year. Again, it's all aggregate contributions. Now we're assuming a 4% annual increase based on last year's cost at each one of these schools. So now they're slightly higher in cost in plan year two, 31.2, 41.6, and 62.4. And so your 10,000 is locking you in slightly less, right? Same capital contributions, 16, 24, and 32%. And so you can see where you've saved the percentage of 1 year at all three of these schools. We now move to plan year three. Again, we assume another 4% increase at each one of these colleges. And, so they're up slightly again. Joan, you can go to plan year three. Um, and so they're up slightly again at each one of these. And so $10,000 is going to lock you in slightly less, but you can see over the course of 3 years, what you've locked in. So same total contributions of 30,000, but because it's spread out, you've locked in a smaller percentage at each college. So now we're going to pretend in this example that you stopped making contributions after plan year three, and it's now time to go to a college and one of the member colleges. And again, we're going to assume that your child goes to college Y, that middle college. Now, because you spread out your contributions, again, which is how most people do. I mean, some people have resources to kind of make one lump sum contributions, and that's great. But most of us are spreading them out over time. And so your $30,000 in total contributions has locked you in slightly less of a year at college Y, 72%. But in the future, that is what you own. So that's your redeemable value. So your child goes to college Y 10 years in the future, 10 years after first plan year in this example. You now, because of your saving, you in 72% of 1 year. And so that redeemable value of your prepaid tuition is 42,631. And so slightly over 12,600 on tuition savings tax free. So again, a real strong value for folks that are looking for predictability in their returns. If you're looking for a way to balance exposure that you have in your traditional 529 plan and know that this tracks tuition inflation, and certainly really good value if you're looking at the private college route. So before I turn it back over to Joanne, I just want to give you a little sneak peek under the hood of what it looks like inside your account. So you're probably thinking to yourself, I'm saving over all these plan years and different percentages, and that's kind of confusing. The good news is we're going to aggregate it all for you, right? And so for you, what you're seeing in your account, and this is just, a quick snapshot here, you can see kind of basic demographic information up top. That account summary is really kind of where you're seeing your contribution information. So that program year, that first column, that's synonymous with plan year. Gross and net contributions. Again, these are going to look the same right now because this person hasn't started redeeming. They haven't started taking out contributions. There's no fees, but certainly once you start taking money out, your gross contribution is going to be a little bit higher than your net because you've started exhausting. And then that last column is that certificate eligibility date. So I'll spend a minute talking about this, but we'll cover it again later. There is a 36-month hold associated with saving in the plan. And so essentially what that means is your first contribution in the plan year starts the clock for 36 months, and you cannot use those funds, that particular certificate, until 36 months after that. So this really just becomes more important if you're a late stage saver, think junior or senior year in high school. 36 months, if you are planning to do this, then you're really going to be looking to save for junior or senior year of college and potentially not all four, because again, based on that runway of holding. And so for this individual, you can see they made contributions over multiple plan years. That's their total contributions. You can see, again, one of the values is you choose how much you want to contribute each year. So you can see in total, they've contributed just over 60,000. And that certificate eligibility date, once they've satisfied the 36-month hold for each plan or program year, that is when that certificate eligibility date will become, eligible to use in a particular year. So if you continue to go in your account summary, the kind of scroll through, this is where you'll be able to see your sample school summary. And this is really where you're able to see kind of how far your savings has gone and how much prepaid tuition you own at each one of the institutions. You can track up to 10, you can change them out at any time. But again, this is showing you the true value of what you have at each one of these institutions. And so based on that individual making contributions over multiple plan years, 6 plan years, you can see that they've saved prepaid more a little bit more at Davidson than they have at Georgetown, a little bit more at Georgetown than they have at Middlebury, I think, or a little bit more at Duke, a little bit more at Duke than they have at Amherst, and so on and so forth. And so that's all that aggregated together in a view screen. That value of tuition purchase, that represents the current tuition value at the designated sample school multiplied by your years of tuition purchase. So simply stated, if you were to fully exhaust your account, that would be the actual cash value. Now, in each one of these cases, you probably wouldn't do that because this person has saved more than a year. But again, that just gives you an idea of what the cash value would be. And then that years of tuition available, once you've satisfied the 36-month holds for each one of the years that you've saved in the plan, the years of tuition available is going to match the years of tuition purchased. So I'm going to turn it back over to Joanne to talk a little bit more about savers in the plan and go through some of those frequently asked questions, and I will transition to answering some questions.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Yeah, lots of questions coming in. I'm trying to keep up with them all, and I know some of the questions are excellent. I know I will be addressing in the next session, so you may have noticed that I responded that we'll tackle those live. But again, keep them coming. Thanks so much for sending those out. So let's talk about some of the families that traditionally save with private college 529 plan. Certainly, we have families who will open an account as soon as the child is born, or even in some circumstances before the child is born, if they know that it's on the way, because they fully expect that their child is going to attend a private institution, and likely one of the colleges and universities on our list. And again, find the value in that. And so open an account early and start saving. We also have families who wait a little bit longer until the educational path might become a little more clear and decide to open an account, or even roll funds over from a traditional 529 savings account into private college 529, let's say in the middle school year or sophomore or high school freshman and sophomore year in high school, again, to kind of lock in that tuition because the educational path has become a little bit more clear. We do have families that are saving in both types of 529 plans. And this is my personal situation. And so I have two kids. I live in Massachusetts, and so each of my kids has their own private college 529 account. So I'm locking in tuition, and I can use that at any participating college and university in the plan. And I know I don't have to worry about market volatility or market fluctuations, especially as my kids are getting closer to college. I know that that prepaid tuition will be there for them when the time comes. But they also have their own 529 savings plan, and we use our home state plan for that. There are, and this is some things that you would want to take a look into yourself as a potential account owner of a 529 plan if you don't already have one. There are certainly significant federal tax benefits that apply to every 529 account, and we'll talk about some of those in a moment. But there are a number of states, over 30 states, offer tax credits or deductions for contributions to your own state plan. And so I contribute to my plan. Massachusetts has one of those benefits, and I contribute to my home state plan because I get a nice tax deduction for that. And there are a handful of states, there are 9 states right now that offer, that have a tax parity. So you can contribute to any 529 plan. It doesn't have to be the home state 529 plan in order to receive that benefit. And so certainly this is something that you want to take a look into, take a look at the tax benefits that are available in your own state. But again, we have families that are taking advantage of kind of the best of both worlds, maybe having a 529 savings account to use for expenses that also go beyond tuition, because tuition isn't the only item that you'll see on the bill. Private college 529, I'm locking in tuition at each of our member institutions, but I'm also saving for other expenses like food and housing, books and supplies, etc., through my traditional 529 savings plan. We also offer, again, for those who are, and we mentioned this previously, for those who are nearing college enrollment, that protection of the principal, what you're contributing to your account. And so again, maybe even, so a little bit further past middle school, if in your junior year or even senior year in high school, even if you're the parent of a high school senior right now, you could still take advantage of Private College 529. And again, it's very clear at this point where your child is going to be going. So you could open an account, lock in tuition, or roll funds over from a traditional 529 plan to protect that tuition and lock in that tuition again as the student is nearing college age. One thing that's really super important to pay attention to from a planning purpose, of course, is that 36-month hold, because prepaid tuition does, as Jonathan mentioned, need to be held in the account for 36 months before it can be redeemed at a member institution. But that still means that parents of high school seniors can take advantage of this plan to use for the senior year of college. Let's take a look at how that might work. So right now, if you're a parent of a high school senior, decisions are rolling out the door, financial aid award letters are going out the door, and you're comparing these financial aid award letters and you're saying, okay, my child is going to be likely going to be attending this institution. We're feeling pretty sure we're going to commit here. Maybe we haven't paid the tuition deposit yet. It's not quite May 1, but we're pretty certain. And we're going to have this balance due, or this tuition gap, this balance due to cover of $10,000 this year. And families know that tuition is going to be increasing at institutions even once the student is enrolled. And on average, it's around 4% per year, which is why we're using that average in these examples here. We're using 4%. But let's say this family here, they have that $10,000 balance due. The current tuition and fees for this year at that institution is $50,000. So they will lock in that balance due so it doesn't get a little bit bigger by the time that senior year rolls around. That $10,000 contribution is going to lock in 20% of tuition. You're locking in a percentage of tuition at each of the colleges that participate. Now, 3 years down the road, okay, the student is now a senior in college, and that tuition has been increasing at 4% per year, again, in just this example. And so now that $50,000 of tuition and fees has grown. And so that is now $56,243. That 20% of tuition that you locked in is now worth $11,249. And so you can almost look at that as a $1,250 scholarship that's kind of added to your bill in the senior year of college. And you don't have to figure out where you're going to make that, those ends meet. And so again, a strategy that even parents of high school seniors can take advantage of. If you're the parent of a high school junior, sophomore, first year student or younger, you have the opportunity to lock in more years of tuition to use for more years of college. But there isn't a cutoff age. That is one of the questions that we receive. There isn't a beneficiary cutoff age, but from a planning standpoint, you want to factor in that 36-month hold time frame. Let's just make sure that we cover these plan benefits. I know they've come up a couple of times, but they're really important. And then we'll jump into some of the frequently asked questions that also may have popped up before, but are just important, so important. So we want to make sure that we get to those. First, it's important to understand that our colleges and universities, they guarantee your prepaid tuition. So no matter what happens in the financial markets, if you've locked in a certain percentage, they guarantee that prepaid tuition that you have locked in if the student attends their institutions. And it is guaranteed for 30 years, no matter what happens in the financial markets or what happens to tuition increases. You do not need to know which college your child is going to attend. You are prepaying, you're locking in tuition at every college and university that participates. And right now we have close to 300 colleges and universities nationwide. And you don't need to designate which institution you or your child is attending until you start redeeming those prepaid tuitions, after they enroll and they start redeeming that prepaid tuition. There are no fees. Every dollar that you contribute to your account is purchasing, prepaying, and locking in tuition at the current year rates. And because it's not a savings or investment plan, there is no market risk. You don't have to worry about market volatility. We also do not have there are no income limits, and there are very generous contribution caps. So you can contribute up to 5 full years at our most expensive institution. That is around $375,000. So you have an opportunity to lock in lots of tuition at this current year rate and a lot of opportunity, sort of in between to lock in how much you feel that you would be able to need to use in the future. And of course, 529 plans, and this is true for every 529 plan, and certainly true for private college 529 as well. They come with very generous federal tax and estate planning benefits. So of course, 529 plans grow tax deferred, distributions are tax free as long as they are used for a qualified education expense. It's absolutely true with private college 529 plan as well. And there are also some generous benefits that grandparents can take advantage of from an estate planning benefit. Contributions to 529 accounts also qualify for generous gifting exclusions as well, annual gift exclusions. And so this is something that I would encourage parents and grandparents potentially too to talk to a financial advisor about, to figure out, how do we take full advantage of these strategies that are sort of built into these 529 plans. But I think there are a lot of families today that are cobbling together strategies for meeting college expenses, and a lot of those strategies involve multiple family members. So the 529 plans also come with very easy gifting features. So you could send links to people to contribute, but they can also open their own accounts. A grandparent, an aunt, an uncle, a family friend could open a 529 account for your child. And grandparents especially like the idea of prepaid plans because they don't have to worry about market volatility. They don't have to worry about that gift being there for the child when it comes time to enroll in college. So again, this can be a family event, and we encourage you, whether they're opening their own accounts or contributing to yours, to involve as many people. And families are looking for different ways to, kind of contribute beyond traditional gifts when it comes to graduation and other events. Let's jump into some frequently asked questions. And again, some of these we may have already covered, but it's so important we want to make sure too that we address all of them. You do not need to know where your child is going to college, but you do need to select at least one sample institution when you open an account. And that's just so that we can provide the screenshots that Jonathan showed before. So we want to show how much prepaid tuition that your contributions are actually purchasing. We need at least one sample school to do that, but you can select up to 10 sample schools, and you can change those out as many times as you'd like to just see how much tuition do I own at each of these institutions. You do not need to purchase an entire year of tuition. Think about that example that we shared before, where the family has a pretty clear idea that they have the award letter at this point. They have a balance due, and so they know I don't need to lock in a full year of tuition. I can only need to lock in this portion, and then I'm going to have that locked in and ready for me and available 36 months down the road. Not everybody has the luxury of having a financial aid award letter in their hand this time of year, and especially for families who are younger and they're have younger children and they're trying to plan in advance. It's challenging to do that without an award letter. And there are some really unique tools out there. You could visit any college and university's website. This is true for any college and university that awards federal financial aid. They are required to provide what's called a net price calculator. So you go onto the financial aid section of their website and you can answer a handful of questions about your financial circumstances and your student, and it will generate an estimated financial aid award package based on historical awarding policies. And this is just an estimate, but it can be a good guideline or a good reference when you're just trying to plan for how much, when we're factoring in financial aid opportunities, how much should we plan for? And I can promise you that any amount that you have set aside, you'll be glad that you did when the time comes. So don't worry too much about getting the right exact number, just knowing that there are some really good guidelines out there to help you figure out, a general amount to save, and you can use those tools. But most families, especially with private colleges and universities, they do have generous financial aid opportunities, including merit scholarship opportunities, and the majority of them are discounting their tuition, and most families do not need to lock in a full year of tuition. Every little bit can help. Here's some really good news for families too who are participating in the plan. And this is one of the questions that did come in. We are constantly looking for new schools to join the plan, and we do outreach to those institutions, especially when we get nominations from individuals who say, yes, we really like this institution to join. And the good news is that when an institution does join the plan, we collect their tuition and fees going back to 2003 when we opened our doors. And so families who have been contributing over the years and locking in tuition rates over the years, when we collect all of those tuition rates for the new institution, they will have effectively locked in those rates for the years in which they had contributed to their plan, and they could start redeeming as long as those tuition certificates have passed their 36-month eligibility date. They could start redeeming tuition at those institutions as soon as they join once the student is enrolled. People will also ask, and we've had questions come in about, what happens if an institution leaves the plan? We have, and it doesn't happen often, we have had institutions close their doors and shut down, and unfortunately that does happen. But if an institution decides to leave the plan, and this doesn't happen often, but if they do decide to leave the plan, they are still obligated to honor the prepaid tuition certificates that were purchased for 30 years when they were a participating or member institution. So again, good news and some protection there for families. We've covered this one a number of times, but again, it's really important for planning purposes. Prepaid tuition does need to be held for 36 months before it can be redeemed at a member institution. And that eligibility date, going back to Jonathan's example that he shared before, that eligibility date is based on the first contribution date in the plan year. So if you make one contribution, that will be the date that tuition certificate is eligible. But if you make multiple contributions throughout the year, which many families do to support their budget, it will roll, the tuition certificate eligibility date will roll back to the very first contribution date in that plan year. We've had a number of questions come in about this one, and this is an important one. What happens if my beneficiary does not attend a member college? And the good news is that there's a lot of flexibility here too. So let's go back to the example that I shared before. So, I have two kids, and each of them have a private college 529 account. If my oldest does not go to a private college 529 member institution, I can roll that prepaid tuition over to my second child and still retain the years of locked-in tuition that I have. And if she doesn't go to a member college, then I can take a full refund from the plan, plus get up to 2% compounded annually on top of that. And I can use those funds and send those to any college or university, as long as I use those funds for a qualified expense under the 529 code, which includes, of course, tuition and fees, food and housing, books and supplies. And now those expenses have even expanded significantly beyond that. As long as it's used for a qualified expense, you aren't paying any tax, any income tax or any penalties on the earning portion of that distribution. So again, if your child doesn't attend a member institution and they go to another school, take a full refund from the plan, plus up to 2% compounded annually, and there are no tax penalties as long as it's used for a qualified education expense. Just wanted to really quickly highlight our colleges and universities. Unfortunately, we don't have enough screen space to list everybody here. So I would encourage you to visit our website, privatecollege529.com. And from there, go to the member schools from the menu. And we have a really great search tool that's available on our site. You can search through our member institutions if you want to, very quickly, either by state or alphabetically sorted. However, you can also sort through our member colleges based on programs and majors, based on location, based on size, based on cost, etc. So take full advantage, or even acceptance rate. So take full advantage and explore all of these institutions. There are direct links out to our member colleges website, so you have an opportunity to learn about the plan. And there's or learn about that institution. There's every type of college and university in this plan. We've got large research institutions, small liberal arts colleges. We have, every flavor, religious affiliated institutions, STEM institutions, really everywhere in between East Coast to West Coast. So take a look. There's a good chance that there are institutions on there that could be a great fit for your child that you may never have even heard of before. So take a glance and take full use of that search tool to see all of the great colleges and universities that participate in the plan. And I know we have some additional questions that may have come in through the chat, Jonathan. And so in a minute, I'll put it back over to our contact information. So we'll just have that up there. If a question pops up after the session today, and this happens, right? Something you don't think about, just shoot us an email, education@pc529.com. Jonathan and I both monitor that. And so we'd be happy to get back to you with any questions that you may have about the plan. But in the meantime, Jonathan, I'll look to see. I know I marked some of these that we'll answer live. I'll make sure that I've answered all of those
Sure.
live. If not, I'll do that, but I'll turn it over to you in case there are any that have kind of come in the meantime.
Yeah, no. So one question I'll just address, and I was in the process of typing it, but I think I'll just address it live. So, how do institutions view these accounts in determining financial aid calculations? So, I think that's a really excellent question. So, institutions themselves are not aware of families that save specifically in our plan, unless obviously the family discloses. And so, really, the how it would be part of the financial aid calculation is this. The value of this plan would be reported as any other asset that the family has, a 529 asset that falls under other assets the family reports. And the value of that is going to be what we call our FAFSA value. And so that's right in the account owner's account. But essentially, it's going to be that contribution over time with that up to plus 2%. So that's it's going to be reported as like any other general asset. But again, there's no direct like, hey, this person's saving in PC 529. So it's just kind of lumped together. But great question, and one we get all the time.
There's a question here too, for kids who might be U.S. citizens or are living outside of the United States, but plan to attend college in the United States. And so that is completely fine. If you're a U.S. citizen, you can absolutely participate in this plan. Doesn't matter where you live, and then redeem at a member institution. So that's completely fine.
So one question, just kind of generally, how does it, excuse me, how does this 529 differ from other ones? The standard 529 can be used for public and private school. And so, I guess to that, I would say that this falls into that umbrella of the prepaid plans, which, as Joanne mentioned, there's a handful of states and then ours that offer the prepaid plan options. Obviously, ours, we're working with close to 300 colleges across the country. Um, I think what and kind of in speaking with our account owners and speaking with financial professionals, a lot of individuals are using this plan if they're thinking about the private path that's in their future, if they're looking for a little bit more predictability, if they're looking to kind of reduce risk of market exposure and just have something that, again, is tied to that tuition inflation. And so, in terms of like, 529 rules, ours falls much like any other 529 or just like any other 529 plan, kind of the federally authorized plans. But, and I would say the other major difference is ours is really kind of tracking that tuition and mandatory fees, which again, if you think about kind of our broad college savings portfolio, and we know that folks are saving from multiple areas and through multiple resources and channels, this does work really well kind of in conjunction with your traditional 529 plan, especially if you're in a state already that's not a tax parity state, where you could get that state income tax deduction or credit.
and we did have a couple of questions about the state tax deduction. And each state I mentioned, there are over 30 that do have a credit or deduction for contributions to a 529 plan. As we mentioned, there are those 9 tax parity states where you can contribute to any plan. So the good idea to double check directly with a tax advisor because the policies do vary
Mhm.
state by state in terms of what you are able to take a credit or deduction for. There's a question too, do the colleges pay to belong to this program? And they don't, but they do guarantee the prepaid tuition that families are locking in. So there is some risk associated with that. So, and they're taking on that risk as in when they're as a participating member institution. So while there aren't fees for them to participate, they are taking on risk by guaranteeing prepaid tuition.
Another question I missed, if covered earlier, does the plan cover any expense other than the tuition? So in terms of kind of the locking in and prepayment, it's going to be tuition and mandatory fees. Obviously, at private colleges, tuition is the big expense. The mandatory fees are going to be certainly smaller. Um, but of course, if folks wanted to use to cover expenses outside of tuition and mandatory fees, you could think books and supplies, room and board. Essentially, that would be kind of taken out in a refund scenario. So that's that up to plus 2% compounded annually. But again, the intention of the program is really to kind of lock in and save for those tuition and mandatory fee expenses, which, as all of you know, at private colleges are the certainly a lion's share of the expenses.
There's a great point about how 529 plans are treated on financial aid applications. And there's some really good news here for parents too. As Jonathan mentioned, colleges and universities, they don't know what you have. They don't know that you're participating unless you directly disclose that to them. But I'm not sure how they would factor that in to it wouldn't be factored in automatically to the process, but they don't know that you participate in this plan, so you don't have to be worried about it impacting eligibility for financial aid because you have prepaid tuition. It is important to know that 529 assets in general, like many parent assets, are reported on the FAFSA. They're reported as a lump sum. And so it doesn't differentiate what types of accounts you have or how much you have in each of those accounts. So there wouldn't be transparency about really what's making up that total asset amount. But in parent assets, or I should say 529 plans, it's very clear in the FAFSA instructions that they are treated as as a parent asset on the application. And that's favorable because parent assets are factored into the formula at a much lower rate than student assets. The most that parent assets can be factored into the formula is 5.6% of the total asset amount. So you think about that, if total parent assets are, let's just say, $100,000, and that could be a combination from a variety of things. It wouldn't include retirement. It also wouldn't include the primary value or the value of your primary residence. So think other types of assets. The most that would be factored into the formula or the SAI formula is $5,640, right? So it's more beneficial to have those resources set aside, knowing that it's not going to have as great of an impact on the SAI formula as many families tend to believe. There's also been some recent changes with the reporting of 529s, specifically around non-parent owned accounts. So if a grandparent, an aunt, uncle, family friend opens an account for a 529 account for the student, it used to be reported as student income when distributions were being taken from that account, but that's no longer the case. And no longer are those accounts reported on the FAFSA. So maybe another good reason why you might want to talk to grandparents, aunts, uncles about perhaps, opening an account in their name if that's something that they're interested in helping to contribute toward. The CSS profile, which is required by between 250 and 300, mostly private colleges and universities. Um, uh, but not all colleges and universities, even in our plan, require the form. It does dive a little bit deeper into families' financial circumstances. They do ask for any resources that are going to be coming to the student from grandparents and aunts and uncles, and so that would be reported on the CSS profile. But similar to the FAFSA, most 529 plans are treated as a parent asset, and on the CSS profile, it's only factored in a 5% instead of 5.6% like the FAFSA. So some good news there in terms of like you don't have to worry too much about your savings and what you have set aside having a significant impact on your financial aid eligibility. These formulas are largely income driven.
Another question that came in, if your child does not go to college, can you roll this money over to a Roth as you can with the traditional 529 plan? So the answer to that is yes. Our funds are going to be, or your funds can be rolled into that Roth IRA, subject to the rules associated with that new provision in terms of the account being open for, I believe, 15 years, the funds being in for 5, and subject to the maximum kind of Roth contribution um, amount each year. But yes, you can do that. And in that scenario, the value would be that up to plus 2% compounded annually. There's another question about kind of where the funds are going. So, I think as we mentioned, or maybe as we didn't, so we're taking all the contributions that go into the plan and we invest in a qualified trust and with target rates of return to essentially cover tuition increases as well as operating expenses internally. And our board of directors is kind of staffed or representatives of our member colleges, and we have an investment committee that's chaired by a subsection, or that's a subsection of the board, kind of sets that investment policy statement. So that's kind of how it works on our end.
We had another question come in asking about are account owners able to track if they're seeking to roll over funds? So sort of that refund
Yeah.
formula, if a child doesn't redeem tuition at a member institution, how do you know what that refund amount will be? Of course, and going back to the formula, the refund formula is a full refund of your contributions plus up to 2% compounded annually, depending on the performance of that underlying trust, as Jonathan was describing. And so you in your account, this isn't a screen that we showed, but within your account, there is a section where you can see that refund value. That's also the amount that you use when you're reporting. If you're a senior in high school and you're completing the financial aid applications, that is the same number. It's the refund value that you would use to report the asset value of your prepaid 529 plan. So it shows up in your account under the FAFSA value. But that's true for all prepaid plans. If you the amount they want you to report on the FAFSA is essentially the refund value of that. On a 529 traditional 529 savings or investing plan, it would be the market value of that.
Question about compensation for advisors for referrals. So, so our plan, much like a majority of the plans in the industry, are direct sold plans, and so these are going directly to consumers, directly to most of you on the line, and we're kind of educating you, and so you're kind of taking that to open on your own. We're not paying any direct fees to advisors or compensation. What we do with financial professionals is really two things. Number one, we want to get in front of folks to educate them on that this plan exists. So as they're having conversations with their clients and they're aware of this. Um, and secondly, from when clients learn about it, if they're going to their advisor saying, "Hey, have you heard about this?" There's kind of that like symbiotic relationship, and they kind of know that this plan does exist. And so, you might see us if you are a financial professional yourself and you're on here. You might see us at different conferences, or you might see us in different channels doing education with certain organizations that are working directly with advisors. But it's really kind of from an education and awareness standpoint. And that's kind of how we want financial professionals just to kind of know who we are as we're having those conversations with about them and families.
There's also a question about using the plan in other ways, or is it strictly for 529 contributions? And it is. It's Private College 529. When you're contributing to your account, you are locking in tuition at the current year rates at all of the institutions, and it needs to be used for undergraduate tuition and fees at those member institutions. So it is strictly used for those resources for that purpose. But again, we know plans change and families want flexibility. And that's why you can get a full refund of those contributions plus up to 2% compounded on top of that to take to any other institution. And because it all falls, if as long as it's a qualified expense under that 529 umbrella, you would not be paying any taxes or penalties on the growth of that. But yet again, strictly prepaid tuition through the plan, strictly for undergraduate tuition and member colleges and universities. Can private vocational school, so in our plan, in order to be an eligible institution, they are required to be 4-year not-for-profit private institutions. I think we've gotten to all of the plan questions, but we're happy to stick around in case any other questions pop up. But just to wrap things up, and in case in case there aren't any additional questions, we do have our email address listed below. Please don't hesitate to reach out. We'd be happy to respond. We know questions pop up after you're gonna sit with the information for a bit longer. So again, contact us if there's anything that we can help with, or even if you'd like help with your own, kind of scenario,
Hmm.
college savings plan. If you want to kind of talk about where, what your goals are, we can help provide some recommendations and kind of help assess how you could potentially fit this plan into your college savings strategy. So again, please don't hesitate to reach out. We're happy to help in any way. That's part of our mission here at College Well and Private College 529 Plan. Again, just to help families get on the right path and not to be overwhelmed by this process, because I promise you can make it work. The earlier you start saving and planning, the better. We're here to help every step of the way.
Yeah, thanks again, everyone, for joining. And like Joanne said, please do reach out with any additional questions. And I know that Martha was having some internet difficulty coming back and forth, and so that's she just dropped us a quick message,
Uh,
and so that's what happened there. But you'll obviously be hearing follow up, and you'll be hearing a lot of future webinars from Saving for College, of course. So yes, and thank you all for attending. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much.